Quarterback moves. What's next for the NFL? Yesterday, Adam Schefter talked about some quarterbacks who could become free agents next season. One name that stood out was Sam Darnold, and Schefter believes the Las Vegas Raiders could be a possible landing spot for him. Let's break it down. During the discussion, Schefter mentioned that the Pittsburgh Steelers are considering their quarterback options. Russell Wilson might return to Pittsburgh, even though many believe that's unlikely. However, he has been in talks with the team about his future. Another name in the mix is Justin Fields. The Steelers have made it clear they want one of these two quarterbacks, but Fields will likely have multiple teams interested in him. The biggest quarterback story this offseason might be Sam Darnold. Currently with the Minnesota Vikings, the team wants to keep him, but it won't be cheap. The franchise tag is an option, but Schefter believes the Las Vegas Raiders could be a team to watch. They might be interested in signing Darnold, depending on how things play out. Another major topic is Aaron Rodgers and his future with the New York Jets. The Jets have a new head coach and general manager, and when teams bring in new leadership, they often make big changes. Many believe that Rodgers might not return to the Jets, though nothing is certain yet. First, he needs to decide if he even wants to keep playing. If he does, his next move will be one of the biggest stories of the offseason. As for the Raiders, they are making big changes. Their leadership has shifted, and they brought in Super Bowl-winning coach Pete Carroll. They also hired Chip Kelly, an offensive coach with a lot of experience. With these moves, the Raiders are clearly trying to build a stronger team for next season. There's a lot to watch in the coming weeks. Will Sam Darnold join the Raiders? Will Aaron Rodgers stay in New York? And what will the Steelers decide with their quarterbacks? Let's see how it all unfolds. Will Sam Darnold stay or go? The Raiders' next move. Last season, there were big questions about how the Raiders' offense was being built. One major issue was that Luke Getsy struggled to properly install an offensive system. When he was with the Chicago Bears, it was his first attempt, and it didn't go well. When he came to the Raiders, it was his second chance, but once again, things didn't work out. Installing an offense is not the same as calling plays. It involves setting up route concepts, making adjustments based on defensive coverage, and creating a system that works under different game situations. Getsy failed at that twice, but now the Raiders have Chip Kelly, who has a lot more experience. He's done it successfully with Oregon, the Eagles, the 49ers, UCLA, and Ohio State. Now, he'll get a chance with the Raiders, and that could make a big difference. If the Raiders had Sam Darnold last year, things might not have gone well. But this year could be different. With a stronger coaching staff, there's a real chance that the Raiders could turn things around if they bring in Darnold as their quarterback. On the defensive side, Patrick Graham will continue calling plays, and how he works with Pete Carroll will be key. If everything comes together, the Raiders could have an elite defense, depending on which free agents they bring back. Adam Schefter has made it clear that the Raiders are a team to watch when it comes to signing Sam Darnold. Unlike other quarterbacks, Darnold won't require a big trade. He's set to become a free agent, unless the Minnesota Vikings decide to franchise tag him. But if they do, they'll owe him a guaranteed contract, which would affect their salary cap. The Vikings never planned to pay big money for a quarterback. Their focus was on players like Justin Jefferson, Christian Darrisaw, and Jonathan Greenard, who all got top contracts. Their original plan was to have a rookie quarterback like J.J. McCarthy, which would have helped balance their payroll. But now, with Darnold unexpectedly stepping up, the Vikings face a tough decision. In the end, it seems like the Vikings may not be able to afford Darnold, making it very possible that he ends up with another team, maybe even the Raiders. Can the Raiders follow the Eagles' blueprint? The Las Vegas Raiders have a big opportunity this offseason. If Sam Darnold becomes a free agent, the Raiders could sign him without giving up draft picks. The challenge? Money. Signing Darnold won't be cheap, and the Raiders don't have much salary cap space right now. We'll get into that soon, but first, let's talk about the bigger picture. Adam Schefter made it clear that the New York Jets aren't bringing back Aaron Rodgers, and Justin Fields will have plenty of teams interested in him. That leaves the Raiders watching closely to see if Darnold becomes an option. But beyond just finding a quarterback, the Raiders need a winning strategy. The Eagles' success story. The Philadelphia Eagles have built a strong, consistent team over the past decade. They've been to 3 Super Bowls in 10 years, winning 2 of them. And they didn't do it by relying on superstar quarterbacks. Nick Foles and Jalen Hurts both led them to championships. But the real secret was building a dominant roster. The Eagles proved that a great team can win, even without a Hall of Fame quarterback. Their offensive and defensive lines are among the best in the league, and that has been their foundation. They have talented starters, but they also develop strong backups. For example, Jordan Davis was a first-round pick and is still a rotational player on defense. Josh Sweat was a 4th-round pick who took 5 or 6 years to develop, but now he's a key player. Milton Williams, Nolan Smith, and other young defenders add to their depth. This system works because they don't just build for today, they build for the future. Can the Raiders do the same? If the Raiders want to compete, they need to follow a similar strategy. In many ways, their defensive line is already close to what the Eagles have. The Raiders don't have Jalen Carter, but they do have Max Crosby, who is just as dominant. Imagine a defensive line with Max Crosby, Malcolm Kunze, Adam Butler, Christian Wilkins. That's an elite defensive front, if they stay healthy. The Raiders also have young players like Tyree Wilson and Clelin Ferrell as depth, and they can add even more talent this offseason. If the Raiders revamp their defensive line and build a strong offensive line, they can win with a solid quarterback just like the Eagles did. It's all about building the right roster. Now, the big question. Will the Raiders make the right moves? Raiders' tough roster decisions. Who stays and who goes? The Las Vegas Raiders have some big decisions to make this offseason. They have 27 free agents, and bringing everyone back would cost a lot of money. Right now, the Raiders have about $95 million in cap space, but even with low estimates, re-signing key players could cost around $89 million. That means tough choices are coming. The team must decide which players are essential and which ones they can afford to let go. Building a championship-level defense for the Raiders to compete with the Kansas City Chiefs, they need to build a dominant defense. The one time they beat Patrick Mahomes last season, they pressured him heavily. The Philadelphia Eagles have used this same strategy all season, dominating quarterbacks with their defensive line. The good news? The Raiders already have a strong defensive front. If they keep the right players, they can build an elite unit. Key players they may need to bring back. Malcolm Kunze, edge rusher, estimated cost, $13 million. Trayvon Moehrig, safety, estimated cost, $13 million. Adam Butler, defensive tackle. Estimated cost, $7 million. Nate Hobbs, cornerback. Estimated cost, $5 million. Jerry Tillery, defensive tackle. Estimated cost, $7 million. The salary cap challenge. Even if the Raiders don't re-sign every free agent, they still have to fill those roster spots. If they let one of their top defenders go, they'll need a replacement, which will still cost money. For example, a backup quarterback, even on a cheap deal, will cost around $985,000. A replacement running back will still cost $2 million. While the high-end estimate to re-sign everyone is $141 million, that's not realistic. However, the Raiders will have to make some very strategic choices to keep their defense competitive. What's the best move? If the Raiders want to keep their defense elite, they must re-sign their top 5 defensive players. Letting too many key players walk could set the team back years. Now the question is, will the Raiders find a way to balance their budget while keeping their strongest players? Raiders 2025. Fix the offensive line overhaul. The Las Vegas Raiders are facing tough financial decisions, and while their defensive line is strong, they have another major issue: the offensive line. The cost of keeping a competitive team. Even if the Raiders decide to fill their roster with rookie contracts, it's still going to cost a lot. If they try to sign big-name free agents, they'll likely have to let go of key defensive players. That means General Manager Tom Telesco must make careful decisions about where to spend money. Possible cost-cutting moves. Cutting underperforming veterans to save cap space. Trading players like Jacoby Myers, though not ideal. Letting some free agents walk and replacing them through the draft. The offensive line problem. The Raiders' offensive line has been a weakness for years. If you watched the Super Bowl, you saw how dominant the Philadelphia Eagles' O-line was. The Raiders don't have that level of protection, and that's a problem. The Eagles can send 4 or 5 receivers downfield because their offensive line holds up in pass protection. Meanwhile, the Raiders often need extra blockers, tight ends, and running backs to help their offensive line, limiting the passing game. If the Raiders want to compete at a high level, they must rebuild their O-line so they can protect with just 5 men, freeing up more receivers in the passing game. Who stays and who goes? The good news? The Raiders have 2 solid linemen for the future. Colton Miller, left tackle, established veteran, still in his prime Paris Johnson Jr., right tackle, young and full of potential, but the left guard, right guard, and center positions remain big question marks. Some names have been mentioned as potential signings. Jordan Mailata, Eagles, strong tackle but expensive, Mickey Becton, Jets, injury-prone but talented Trey Smith, Chiefs, a physical guard, but would cost too much. What's the smart move? The Raiders can't afford to overspend on expensive offensive linemen. Instead, they might draft linemen to develop long-term sign affordable veterans instead of high-priced stars. Focus on smart roster moves instead of flashy free agent deals. The bottom line, if the Raiders want to compete in 2025, they must invest in their offensive line, but they can't afford to break the bank. It's a tough balancing act, but fixing the O-line is the key to unlocking their full offensive potential. Raiders' draft strategy: fixing the offensive line and defensive front. The Las Vegas Raiders have some big decisions to make as the draft approaches. With salary cap concerns, they need to balance keeping key players and investing in young talent. A historic draft class for offensive linemen. This upcoming NFL draft is stacked with interior offensive linemen, possibly the best group in 20 years. If the Raiders want to upgrade their offensive line, now is the time. Defense or O-line with pick number 6? The Raiders have 2 options for their 6th overall pick. 1, draft a defensive end. If they let Malcolm Kuntz walk, they could target a top pass rusher like Abdul Carter, if he's still available, James Pierce Jr., a 6'5", 260-pound athlete with elite movement, Mike Green. Another solid option to draft an offensive tackle. Instead of paying big money for a free agent tackle, they could take a future star like Josh Connerly Jr. Despite a rough Senior Bowl, he's still a projected top 15 pick, Josh Simmons, an impressive athlete from Ohio State, Anthony Belton, a potential second-round steal who could move to guard what makes the most sense. Prioritizing the offensive line. If the Raiders want to compete, protecting their quarterback is key. That means investing in guards and tackles. Second-round targets. Even if they draft a tackle early, they should also target top guard prospects like Anthony Belton, Charles Grant. These guys could be dominant interior linemen for years to come. The bottom line. The Raiders have options, but they must make smart draft choices. Whether they choose to replace Kuntz with a top pass rusher or solidify their O-line, their decisions in this draft will shape the team's future success.